abusive relationship wraps up, victims stop to do an analysis. They want to know what went wrong, what signs did they miss. One of the stages that particularly is bothersome is the love bombing. In fact, they often are blamed for missing the red flags as if those of us who get into such a relationship are naive or worse yet, stupid. Thank you so much for joining me today on Breaking Free from Narcissistic Abuse. I'm your host, Dr. Carrie Kerr-McAvoy, a clinical mental health specialist with over 20 years of counseling experience, and I'm a narcissistic abuse survivor. In this episode, we're going to analyze the 5 stages of love bombing and what makes this strategy so particularly intoxicating. What happens psychologically and physiologically that makes it such a binding experience? And is it the victim's fault for falling prey to it, or is this something that we should hold abusers accountable for? Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss future episodes of this podcast. And if this topic or others of this podcast resonate with you, stop and leave me a review and let me know what you think. As a listener-supported podcast, we appreciate your contributions in helping us shine the light on abuse so that the world can become a safer place. So with that said, let's listen in to this replay of a TikTok Live. We're thinking a lot about love bombing in terms of reality because most of us think that what we experience in life is real. We don't realize that we're actually taking input. We're just being hit with a bunch of stimulation that's in the form of molecules and probably that's the best way to think of it. It's forms of molecules, and it strikes our senses, and our senses have to decode it. And based upon the way it decodes, it then is interpreted by the brain, and the brain's interpretation of it is based on a really complex system based upon past experiences, trial and error, the way we tend to problem solve, our traumas, culture, gender. For example, the women and men's brains are actually wired differently. There is a connector between the two hemispheres. So you have 2 separate hemispheres that actually have very separate personalities. And they know that because there are people who have epilepsy that is so catastrophic that if they don't separate, and they even actually remove one of the hemispheres, this person could eventually die. So they actually do a removal of one of your brain hemispheres and then just leave the remaining brain. And so what they find, or they'll separate the brains, and what they find is that the person who's the right side versus the left side has very distinct personalities. They actually argue sometimes. They don't always agree and cooperate all that well. It's fascinating. It's utterly fascinating. So the connector between the two of them is called the corpus callosum. Think of like a highway, like an internet highway. Men's tends to be more linear in the way that it processes information, which makes sense. If you think of things from an evolutionary standpoint, if we want to survive and you're a hunter and you're focused on finding prey, you want to tune out everything but your hunt, what you're focused on. You don't want to be distracted by things around you or what's happening back at home. You want to focus on being as quiet as you can possibly be so you can take down the prey. That makes sense. It works evolutionary. Well, women's is more richly connected. It's more interneural pathways. And that also makes sense evolutionary-wise too, because if women are responsible for home, the hearth, children, we need to be aware of multiple information coming in at the same time, or we're going to end up having someone get killed. They'll fall into the fire or something. So it really makes sense why we're wired that way. But where we get into trouble is that we assume the reality that we see is the same for everyone. And therefore, then they should have the same reactions or make the same decisions that we make. And we don't. There's a lot of reasons. And you may have seen the video I posted about the fallacy of oversimplification. It's actually illogical fallacy, where we often end up thinking there's one explanation that explains everything for whatever we're doing. And there's not. There's multiple explanations of why we do what we do. There was an article years ago that I read about why did Van Gogh cut off his ear? And the upshot, the ending conclusion of the argument, and this was theorists talking about, well, he could have done it because of early childhood trauma. Maybe he did it because of his relationships with people in the times. Maybe it had to do with his fame. Maybe it had to do with depression. There was all this theorizing about the possible reasons why Van Gogh cut off his ear. But when it really boiled down to Was that we'll never know. There were lots of reasons, and a lot of them were correct. It wasn't that one answered everything. We tend to oversimplify, which kind of ties me into my platform, which is narcissistic abuse. One of the reasons that victims are often told we should just leave, that it's just as simple as packing up and leaving, is because of that fallacy of oversimplification. We tend to think that because it might be simple in our situation, or we haven't had the similar experiences this person may have had, or we've maybe never encountered having a narcissistic relationship at all, we don't really understand the complexity it might be involved in any given particular situation. And as a result, we then think that what would work for us would then work for them, and why shouldn't it work for them? Let's launch into the 5 stages of love bombing. When you meet someone who's setting up a toxic relationship, and the reason I use the word toxic relationship and keep it general is because I really want this to be not specific just to narcissists. Narcissists are not the only ones who do this. This is also about anyone who's antisocial personality disorder, or just maybe more higher on the cluster B end of pathology. What they first do when they meet you is they begin to mimic and mirror you. And I know we've talked a lot about this, but I want to give you a little more background why they mimic and mirror you. They're doing something really pivotal, and you'll start to see the whole picture when I get further into it. They mimic and mirror you by agreeing with you and creating a backstory that is very similar to your own. They'll highlight the things that you share in common naturally, but they'll also exaggerate and maybe even lie as a way to create a sense that you are like them, that they are like you. So say that you went to a certain school, they may say, oh, I used to live in that area and I went to that school for a semester. They may or may not, or maybe they just took one class, but they'll exaggerate it so that you suddenly in your mind's eye saw them there on that campus and shared a similar experience with you. Or you may say that you've gone to a certain concert with a certain band, and they suddenly have done that too. Again, the point of it is so for you, it creates this similarity that you have a sense of likeness, and it creates a backstory that you've shared these things in common, and almost as if you shared them together, like you were both there together. It creates this history, a shared history with you. It's really important in relationships that we have a shared history. It gives us a basis of understanding each other. It gives us a basis of memories we can refer back to. So they create a past is what they're actually doing. They're creating a past with you. But it also does, we already know that mirroring and mimicking creates high suggestibility, makes you trust them because you feel this likeness, like they're like you. So then you assume that they also understand other things about you because the shared past. So it creates this whole sense of symmetry. Symmetry is what it feels like. The second thing they do is they tell you a sob story. They'll tell you something shocking, something that you don't expect to hear in a first meeting. It could be a whole wide range of things. It's not necessarily a bad story, but it's startling. Like they had a bad loss. Somebody important to them died. They were abused. They were exploited. Something that's really like whoa, catches your attention. This does a couple things. One is the vulnerability of it makes you think that if this is how honest and authentic they are, then maybe I can be as authentically honest as well. It puts you kind of almost on a spot of wanting to meet them in vulnerability, which they by the way, that may be a real story or not. I don't know. It's sometimes true, not always true. But it isn't as emotionally loaded as you think it is. You think this was powerful, like incredible. And it takes you to a deeper level of intimacy with you that hasn't been earned. You don't know them long enough to have really gone to this depth, but now you're being forced there because if you don't, you feel like you're withholding or not being, you just feel, it puts you on an uncomfortable spot. But it does something else. It does something really powerful for the future of the relationship. Now they've created something that they can refer back to as an explanation for future bad behavior. So when they do something wrong, they can say, yeah, how I had this trauma or this happened to me in the past. And that's why I have a hard time. So it makes them harder to harder for you to hold them to responsible or accountable for their actions, because now they have this thing that they point to as an explanation. It does a third thing. Sometimes they'll also tell you about past bad relationships. And again, a lot of us do this, but the reason they're doing it is as a sort of a warning of how you're not to be. So they may say, one person I had a relationship was like this. This person didn't respect me enough, or run me down a lot, or micromanaged me, or something. They'll make something up. Or they'll tell you how this person didn't put enough emphasis on the relationship. Maybe they put their friends above them, or whatever. They'll create these explanations. This other person wasn't truthful enough. What they're doing is they're giving you a script of how you're supposed to be with them in the future. And if you don't follow the script, you're going to say, you're just like so-and-so. Remember, I told you I had that bad relationship and this person never put me first, or this person never told me the truth, or, I'm feeling awfully triggered by you. That reminds me a lot of so-and-so. That's what they tend to do, is they'll have this story that they now can sort of compare you to and make sure that it keeps you accountable, makes you emotionally responsible for the relationship as you try to avoid. In fact, you'll find yourself becoming smaller out of fear of being like that person. I made mental notes. Don't do this. Don't be like this, so that I didn't somehow act similar to this other person. So that's the second thing they do.
If you've been on social media much, then you probably have heard about sexual or marital coercion. It's when one partner emotionally manipulates the other into being sexually intimate with them. Is this a form of rape? Come listen to a panel of experts discuss this hot topic in an upcoming webinar on October 20th called Isn't Having Sex My Right? I will be joined with a sexologist, a pastor, and other social advocates to explore the connection between sex and intimacy. What is full consent? And how do we improve our intimate connection with others? I can't wait for this webinar. It's going to be the evening of October 20th. Be sure to get your tickets through the show note link below.
The third thing they do is they'll tell you how you're exceptional. You're unique. They haven't met anyone like you who's doing whatever it is that you're doing. Like, I've never met someone who understands me as well as you understand me. Or, I've never felt this close to anyone this fast. Or, I think I met my soulmate. They'll tell you something that makes you feel extraordinary. Just absolutely extraordinary. And who doesn't want that? We all want that. It's an incredible feeling. I mean, we all are extraordinary and unique, but they'll do it as a way. What it does is it creates a bubble that just you and them are in this world together, and you are two special people, and you have this unique experience that you've never had before. So just remember, they just created the past by mirroring your past and telling you how you guys are alike in the past. So you have a sense of shared history. Now they're creating this world that you exist in together, that's a special place that's just the two of you, and no one understands you just like that. And then they're going to do two more things to sort of like tie it all up into a pretty bow. They're going to then future fake. They're going to then begin to dream about what you're going to do together in the future. Maybe, I can see ourselves, I should move here. I can see ourselves moving in together. Or can you imagine what our children would be like? They'll do something that dreams about what could be. Or we should take a trip. Where would you like to go? They'll do something that just is very, very amazing and gets you dreaming about what you can do together. And see, what they just did is they created a whole timeline with you. They created a past, a shared past, even though you didn't actually share it together. They made a special world that you guys are existing in the moment. And then now they're dreaming about what you could have in the future. And actually, it's not real and probably will never happen. But you're having a sense of you have this whole history, a whole timeline, a whole world they just created with you. And it feels wonderful. And then they wrap it all up with this amazing last one, number 5, is they then have incredible intimate experiences, including incredible intimate sex. and get all that hormone with the oxytocin and the adrenaline and all the things that make us, dopamine, which makes us feel very pleasurable and everything's really rewarding. And they tie that all up and you feel like you have just been overwhelmed. I dated a little bit in college and I met my first husband pretty fast, the one who passed away from cancer. He didn't love bomb me. The guy, I hate to tell you, that poor man didn't have a romantic bone in his body. He just didn't. He was an engineer. I mean, really logical. He didn't love bomb me. If anything, he kind of sucked at the whole thing. He just didn't really know how to do it. So when I met this second guy, the guy that was a narcissistic sociopath, he loved bomb me. And, oh, he's masterful at it. I thought I'd been hit by emotional love bomb of a Mack truck. I had never felt something so powerful in my life. I can see why it's intoxicating, honestly. It's bowled me away. It fits every stereotype of fantasy you could ever have. So I understand why we get it's using, here's the other thing, it's using a few things against you really well. And this is the thing we attack victims around, and we really are wrong, and we should not be attacking victims because we're attacking ourselves. This is about humanity. They're using humanity's hardwiring. We're hardwired for belonging from birth. There's actually been studies on babies, and they find that when they're held and comforted, that actually their neurological and physiological system, their body, regulates itself. It helps them, their heart rate slows, their temperature, it becomes more normalized. It actually is not self-regulating, it's an actually regulating experience. We're wired to want connection with another person. So to have someone get us and emotionally meet us so deeply like that, it kind of connects in with our innate need for this because it's not just we want to fit in or have relationships. Yeah, that's true. But it actually hits us at a biological level that's very needed. It's very necessary. A lot of us are kind of lonely and lacking that. Our cultures have kind of gotten distant and we're not as close. We don't have the community that we used to have. I mean, I grew up in a dairy farm and a farming community. We used to have neighbors stop by for coffee in the morning and just sit and shoot the bull with my parents in the morning. We don't do that anymore. We live in kind of siloed lives. So a lot of us we may not even recognize it, but we're kind of like emotionally hungry. And this really meets that need very well. And there's nothing wrong with that. We're built for it. We need that. And that's sad that it takes this kind of deliberately toxic behavior to lock in and do that for us. But it also does something else, as we all want to know and feel seen and understood and special. That it may be a little of our own narcissism. Yes, we're all on the spectrum, but it's part of a healthy self-esteem is to know that you have a unique place in the world. There is only one you in all the universe, and that you matter, and that your needs and emotions and your experiences, everything that makes you a wonderful person matters. And they lock in on that too, and they tie into our innate need for this, and it really helps us feel seen. And as a result, how could we not want that and like that? And how can we not find that really, really powerful? That's why I hate it when people attack us for that. I've actually had people say, so what red flags did you miss? Now, here's another thing. Honestly, and I know I've said this before, anytime you meet someone new, they're nervous, especially if it's a loaded meeting like a date, and you meet each other on an app or you're being set up or you don't really know each other and you want to put your best foot forward. You're nervous. You're going to blow it in a few places. It's not going to go perfectly. There are going to be a few red flags because partly just of nervousness. So we all know that, at some deep level, we're aware of that. And as a result, we don't tend to hold each other that accountable. We tend to give each other grace. Because I do observation as a living. One of the things a psychologist does in every appointment is I have to listen to what you're saying, listen to how you make me feel in the moment for information, because the way I feel around you tells me something about you. But also, I have to sit above and watch at a map level what's happening. I have to put themes together and understand trauma and history and all. I'm doing all this kind of almost navigation. I'm doing this. It's like looking at a map on the phone and doing navigation while I'm experiencing it. Now, if you're in a date and meeting someone new and you're up at this map level, like a navigation and doing an analysis, you're not in the experience. That's like trying to be at your kid's concert with a camcorder or the phone up in front of you and you're taping it. You're not experiencing the experience. You tape the experience. So you're not really living in the experience. You have to be in the moment. And so a lot of what's happening, we're missing. We may be picking it up, but we're picking it up at a subconscious level. It's happening too fast. So we may not be aware that some things are made. That's why one of the biggest things I tell people as they start to heal is please learn to listen to your gut. Because that's when you can go back and do an analysis and say, my gut felt off. I felt edgy. I don't know why. I really like the person. They put themselves forward really, really well. So why is my gut bothering me? Then you can go back and review, okay, what was actually said? When was it said? How was it said? Why? That you can do like post-analysis, but we can't do an analysis in the moment. That's why I just think the critics are too hard on all of us. And I understand why, actually. And if you've been a critic, I know why you're doing it. It's because you're scared shitless. And you don't want this happening to you. So it's really easy to pounce on all the victims and say, there's something bad or wrong with you. That's why it happened to you, as a way for me to say, and it won't happen to me. It's how I kind of they settle themselves or handle their own anxieties because they're fearful of being vulnerable. So they attack us for our vulnerability. There's the big problem. They attack us for our vulnerability because they're fearful of being vulnerable. But we all are vulnerable when it comes to love. We're all vulnerable when it comes to relationship. And you cannot have intimacy in any form. Please hear me. Intimacy will not happen if you're not vulnerable and authentic. It takes both of those things. So people who are ill, who do this as a way to meet their own unconscious and conscious needs, that's on them. What happened is on them. They did this to us. It isn't our fault that it happened. It's happened to us. We're a victim. That's why, yes, I want us to become survivors. That's part of healing, but it was a victimization that happened. We were taken advantage of in a normal situation with normal expectations, and they abused that and used it against us. We are not naive, gullible, or dumb because it happened. I really hope that if anything you can take away from today, I hope you really take that away, because I know these environments get so hostile about all of this, so angry about all of this.
There's the 5 stages of love bombing. It goes way beyond just missing some red flags. This is a pretty exploitive, insidious tactic. But I'd love to hear what you think. Consider DMing me on Instagram or writing me an email, letting me know your opinion of this or other podcast episodes. And otherwise, I will be back on Thursday. And until then, bye-bye.